The loss of the ship Hope to the Great Storm of 1799. The Hope was a two-masted, square-rigged merchant snow. Hailing from Liverpool and under the command of Captain Anyong, her crew of 8 consisted of a master's mate, 4 seamen, and 3 boys in their early to mid-teens. The Hope was on passage from Riga, bound for Lisbon, laden with hemp and iron. She had put into Hull for light repairs before departing to continue her journey, leaving the Humber estuary on Tuesday in late January with favorable winds from the northeast. At 3 a.m. on the Wednesday, not more than 18 hours into their journey, the wind swung against them, blowing from the southeast and increased in strength to that of a hard gale. Captain Anyong and the crew had no choice but to lie the Hope to, reducing sail and steering into the wind and waves in order to best weather the violence of the seas. This presented a problem, for they were now being swept back to the north towards the English shoreline from whence they'd come, and the crew made every exertion to claw back into the wind whenever there was a brief subsidence in the forces of the storm. Being late January, the deck temperature was below zero, the wind chill in the region of -25. The crew battled against heavy snow and high winds in total darkness all night into Thursday. Daybreak did not bring salvation. The weather was thick and fierce around them, the storm showing little to no signs of abating. The captain and crew were yet unable to know the exact position of the ship, making the difficult entrance to the Humber, which was their only salvation, an impossible target, unless they could come by a break in the weather or by a miracle. Suddenly, about midday, a cutter loomed up through the mist and snow. Captain Anyong did his best to bring the Hope within range, hailing the men of the cutter, requesting assistance for a pilot. However, the cutter maintained its course, passing them by and disappearing into the storm, paying no heed to their plight. The crew turned back to sailing the Hope, fighting the wind and seas as the gale raged, and they were driven further northward at the mercy of the storm. Around midnight on the Friday, having spent 2 days battling the storm, the Hope struck ground on a sandy coast somewhere north of Spurn Point. The weather so violent that from her stationary position the waves immediately began to break over her and sweep along her decks. In an instant, one of the boys was taken from the deck and never seen again. The situation was desperate, the ship grounded in blackout freezing conditions. The mate thought he could make it through the surf to the beach using the ship's boat and proposed to do this to the others. Captain Anyong and the Prussian sailor Karl Erich delivered their watches and money to the mate on the hopes that they would one day be returned to their families. Moments later, as the men were attempting to free the boat, a heavy sea broke over them, finishing the job, breaking the boat free and sweeping it into the night. The master leapt for the boat and almost made it, but was unable. He took to the sea before catching himself on the mainstays, until another wave crashed over the Hope, sea and elements too much, and he was gone. The remainder of the crew sought shelter in the rigging, one man in the foretop, the rest in the tops of the mainmast. The hull rose and freed itself from the sand before once more being cast against the shore. So began a period where the wreck of the Hope was beaten on and off the shore in the heavy seas, the waves breaking over her, the currents carrying her up the coast. The masts remained upright through the punishment, the crew waiting for the wreck to break apart beneath them or for the masts to break and hurl them into the freezing sea. The exposed men had been soaked from the sea and were clinging to their positions in the rigging, exposed to the storm around them. During this time, Captain Anyong, along with a fellow seaman and the second of the ship's boys, lost their fight with the elements and fell away from the masts. The wreck of the Hope now found herself against the Millington Highland, grounding against a steep shoreline. The harder impacts with the shore breaking away the mainmast, which fell into the sea alongside the wreck. The last remaining seaman on the mast, apart from the Prussian, lost his grip and was gone. The Prussian, surviving the fall of the mast, made to save the remaining boy who had managed to hold on to this point. The pressures of the storm were too great, the grip between them was broken, and the boy was taken by the sea. The mainmast swung wildly in the waves, still connected to the ship and foremast through the strands of rigging, tossing the Prussian about in the wreckage before it was swept up into the foremast, and the Prussian was able to seize hold and pull his way up into the foretops, where he found the last remaining seaman still alive and clinging on. The ice-clad cliffs loomed through the night, presenting the smallest chance left. The Prussian, recognizing this as the only option, decided to make his move, climbing further up the mast to drop onto the cliffs. The remaining seaman, upon hearing what the Prussian intended, explained that he was frozen in place, his limbs unable to follow the example of the others, to which the Prussian was forced to abandon his final shipmate within the stretches of salvation and make his own way further up the foremast, where, timing the roll of the hull, he leapt successfully down onto the cliff face. The cliffs themselves were treacherous, having been sprayed by the sea and frozen by the wind. The Prussian had to make several precarious attempts before he was finally able to secure the shoreline above. His ordeal was not quite over, for he had to stumble through the still raging snowstorm for several kilometers, his body badly bruised and numbed with the cold. Finally, he came to a local house where the inhabitants, taking pity on him, provided every assistance until 4 days later, when he had recovered and the weather had moderated, at which time he returned to Hull to report the loss of the ship and seek a new berth. Karl Ehrlich was the only member of the crew of 6 men and 3 boys to survive the loss of the Hope in the great storm of February 1st, 1799.